Welcome to the Rhizome Podcast. I'm your host, Torisha Omagumi, and today we are exploring what it takes to show up, to deliver, and to make progress, even when you don't feel inspired. So we often hear that success is driven by passion, rightfully so, energy, and some motivation. But in reality, motivation is unreliable. It comes, sometimes you're motivated, other times you're not. Some days you feel driven, other days you don't just feel like doing anything. I mean, this is the reality of the way our life, the roller coaster of life generally. Yet work still needs to get done. There are targets to be met. The responsibility doesn't pause because you don't feel motivated or you don't feel the energy for that day. So the question we're asking today is not how to stay motivated, but how to stay consistent when motivation disappears. Joining me today is Sola Afolayan, also known as Olushola. Olushola is a purpose-driven leader, social impact practitioner, and a behavioral thinker whose work sits at the intersection of governance, poverty reduction, and human development. Sola is the founder of the She Foundation, an initiative focused on advancing social protection, healthcare, and education systems to drive inclusive prosperity in Nigeria. I mean, I can go on and on about Shola's profile, but I think it's okay to take a step back here and allow Shola to say hello to those listening. Shola, welcome to the Rhizome Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Toji, for having me. It's my complete honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe that the conversation is going to be very welcoming and interactive because this is the reality. This is the reality of the world that we live in. This is the reality of the way life is structured. It's never linear. It's always a roller coaster. You have ups and downs. And like I said, when setting the tone, regardless of if you're having a up or a downer, you're expected to still just produce results. The results will not take a back seat, or no one is going to say, okay, you don't feel like doing this, so it's okay to not be successful, or it's okay to not sort of hit that target. So this is sort of like our reality, and I think that makes the discourse today very, very important for us. So we'd like to start by exploring. I mean, you've lived and worked across high impact, often complex systems like the public sector reform, as well as what you do around poverty reduction. In those environments, I believe that motivation cannot always be relied upon. What has consistency looked like for you in practice as you've done all this work that you've done, especially in those complex systems? Over.
Thank you. This is a conversation very close to my heart because I've gone through the drills of ups and downs in terms of, if I would say, the trends. There are some times when growing up, maybe I'm almost 50, so you can imagine that we've seen the ups and downs of the millennium, and then there is the AI, and then there's the social media that creates over information. So previously you go to the university, you go to the library, you do some research, and then that's where you can write your essays. But now you can just literally sit down and like a 50-page document, you can just churn that out within 15 minutes. That's if you give the appropriate prompt. So you are overdosed with information. And then those kind of information also, if, for instance, if you want to plan, every year people sit down and say, okay, I want to plan for the year. What was my plan for the year, or even every quarter and stuff like that. So I'm trying to say that beyond the planning and beyond motivation that you have said, how do you keep showing up every day? How do you distill from all the noise and pick out the signal and then stay focused and, undistracted? And even as life happens, we know there is the ongoing Iran, UN, US, and the Israeli war. There's ongoing. Then you have issues around petrol. You have your
Right.
child care. You have
Right.
traffic. You have so a lot of distractions are there. So how do you stay consistent and narrow in and forget all the noise and just zoom in? For me, it has always been because my personality is one that I could be an over planner. And I've overcome that by trying to manage. I just stuff down and zoom in. I have the bigger picture, what we call the best eye view, and then the warm eye view. So I need to conceptualize from start to finish and then begin to cut them into bits and pieces. And then just pick them one after the other. Because of that, because I've distilled everything, then I just put that into daily habits. So automatically my phone is nudging me, this is what to do. I've built systems and structure in terms of people that work with me. Everybody has been assigned. So delegating is very important for me. So I just made it a way of life. Anything that is not supposed to be escalated to me, I literally zero in. Sometimes things fall through the cracks that I don't get to hear information that I hear. But it doesn't really matter to me because if it's not a deal breaker, if it's not something that would derail the project, it definitely would not be something that I put my focus on. So, and I can give you an example. There is an example of when I was coordinating a project across 774 local governments, and the project was about 500 billion. It was definitely not something that I would have to have a day-to-day micromanaging of people or issues or grievance cases that
Yeah.
needs to be addressed. So what I just did basically was the structure from bottom to up, from the ward level, from the LGA level to the state level, and also for the federal level. There were individuals that were responsible for that. So what I then need to show up consistently is this structure that I created time for me to hear the feedback at the level in which I needed to address to understand them or to address or to jump in and just resolve issues. So for me, is staying focused on the one thing that is supposed to do. Maybe it's per week, per day, per hour, or per quarter, and then making sure that people that have been put within the systems and structure do their work. That has been quite helpful for me.
Great. Great. Uh, well done. I mean, I admire the work that you do because I believe that your work reflects a very strong emphasis on meaning and purpose, right? I mean, I don't believe that anyone can venture the way you have without very clear meaning and very clear purpose. Yeah. But how does one stay consistent? Because some of the time, um, like you mentioned, when speaking, people get into a new year, new phase, and they pen down resolutions, goals per quarter, goal for the year, and all of that. Ambition that starts by putting pen to paper, which is at that point very theoretical, except, I mean, you pull that up and start to act on it. So the question here is, how does one stay consistent when the work feels meaningful in theory, right? But heavy or exhausting in reality? Over.
Absolutely. Like the sector that I've actually worked in, the social protection space, is quite an emotional, it's technical, but there's a heaviness of the emotions there. The work is very meaningful because you can see in tangible form the impact of your work directly on people. But so that's why I really appreciate the question. So that distinction is quite important to be able to differentiate or distill from the meaningfulness of work and then the reality of the heaviness or the exhaustion that come from the work. Because being meaningful doesn't mean that it's easy to do anyway. Because sometimes your emotions can't really carry you through, or the hope or the energy that you really put into it can't really move you through it, except when the work is tied to purpose. So for me, anchoring my work on purpose and making sure that the meaning also is aligned to the systems. I keep going back to systems and structure is very important because sometimes the most meaningful work is also not the most demanding, or it could either way it can be because it actually stretches one mentally, emotionally, and even sometimes spiritually. I've had to, hit some roadblocks a number of times. My anchor, my belief system is anchored in my sometimes my spirituality quite a bit. So I draw up strength from that. So when the work is very heavy, even though is very meaningful. That is where I go back to the North Star, or to the core of myself to draw some strength from. And one thing I have learned is not to misinterpret why the work is very um how would I say it's exhausting, or why is it heavy, or what.
Right.
Yes, because there are sometimes you want to lose faith in the humanity, in our humanity, because you feel that the work that you are doing, people should embrace.
Right.
So there are some work that you do in the social protection space, or even in the economic activities that leads to inclusive growth. You just feel this is no brainer. I think people should be fair. Why do you okay, so for instance, there was a project I was part of, and we were trying to empower women, uneducated women,
Mm.
and they were going to be benefiting from an economic activity every month. And also because they are unbanked, they won't be able to participate in an organized financial structure, because we then wanted to move them from being unbanked into the banking sector, and then they will have access to loans so that then their businesses can improve.
Right.
But you see people that were supposed to guide them, or they were, I would say, gatekeepers within the
Mm.
community that we needed to engage with. They were, I would say, stealing or
Mm.
manipulating the women. They will collect the cars that we have created for them.
Oh,
Then
wow.
they will they'll collect their pain, they will go withdraw on their behalf and stuff. So sometimes it just is quite painful. So, but I thought this was going to help the household where the women come from, and they ultimately help the community. But why are people, so it's quite heavy sometimes. And it wants to diminish the kind of uh, consecration that
Yes.
and focus and impact that you want to achieve. So sometimes, so instead of me expecting the work to always feel energized, I just focus on how to manage and carry on. I create a rhythm. I pace myself. There are some things I know that like the Bible, that I rely on quite solidly. We say the poor shall always be in the land. So also we have people that are quite not morally or character-wise people that we can emulate. So I just focus on what can be addressed, and the other thing that cannot be addressed, and just keep moving. Yeah. So when the work is meaningful but it's also exhausting, I go to my core, which is the spiritual aspect, and then center around the purpose. You always say you remember why you started. So my why, I'm always revise, looking forward to my why. So okay, this is why I started. I can't give up. This is why it's very meaningful. Look at the impact, and so that's what it is for me.
Thank you. Let's look at some misconceptions because I believe that there are some here and there, right? I mean, from your exposure to behavioral economics and psychology, what are the common misconceptions people have about discipline and consistency, if any? Over.
Yeah, absolutely. For me personally, because when I am perceived as disciplined, people think they misinterpret um, consistency with perfection.
Aha.
That is very critical. I see
Aha.
that quite a lot. And I also project that on others. So when I say, oh,
Mm.
this person operates at this level of discipline, and then I assume that the work that they do is quite perfect. I don't necessarily have to review. I just take that, and that's some sort of benefit because it shows the reliability, the trust level of the person's level of work. But that's definitely a misconception. I also think people see discipline as a force.
Mm.
Um, but sustainable discipline is actually about design. You understand? Because so people think it's
Interesting.
just a one-off thing. Yeah, but it's something that you create by design. It's not a puff, if you get
Mm.
what I mean.
Mm.
But sometimes inconsistency is not also about laziness, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
There are some people that are really, really brilliant. There's a theory out there that people that are procrastinators are quite brilliant people.
Mm.
And
Mm.
because it appears as if they are not consistent in terms of meeting some deadline or they rush to do some work, it means that they are inconsistent or they are lazy. Um, it's not exactly so. It is actually just poor structure that is in place.
Right.
Um, then I think finally, what I will think is, you know, when you are very disciplined, people think that you are joyless.
Mm.
So this person is, yeah, absolutely. So, but I see that quite differently because I think discipline creates freedom um, for you to have time to do more equally important stuff. When you are disciplined and you have done X, Y, Z, that you have earmarked for the time for the a certain period of time, then you can relax. I know there are times when if I'm studying for an exam or I have a project that is going to be launched, and as soon as it's launched, I just feel like jumping into the pool, you know. So the discipline of achieving something actually creates the freedom to focus on other things that matter in life. Yeah. But those
Okay. Yeah.
misconceptions do
They
actually
do they,
do
they
happen.
exist. Yeah. Right. Right. Thank you, Shola. So this is another reality. There's the rush of blood and that very nice satisfaction that we get from achieving our results. So we put in work, we put in effort, we do A, B, C, D, with the aim to achieve whatever, right? And at the end of the day, we see those results. But there are other times, um, and especially for professionals who operate in very high pressure environments where the outcomes are uncertain, right? You're not very sure. You know, you work in a very complex or volatile environment, especially work in the development space, right? Which you play in. So how do you sustain effort, right, when results are not immediately visible? Over.
Right. That's a big one, especially in long-term work, like you
Yes.
just mentioned. For you to see long-term impact in terms of sustained impact over time, it takes a lot of work. You know, we hear a lot of saying, so Nigeria will work. I hope it works in my lifetime. it's a it's a long project.
Mm.
And so if you operate at a certain level, one should have come to the understanding that it's little stuff that adds up. You're never going to see the immediate results.
Mm.
And as a monitoring and evaluation expert or specialist, I've also realized that in projects, there is the what we call the input where you do the inputs for a project, which is planning, monitoring, the budgets for the project is put in there. Then you have outputs. Outputs mean as a result of putting this budget in, then we can organize workshops. At the workshops, people's advocacy is achieved, awareness is achieved, and thereafter, then it leads to some certain kind of outcomes that you want to see. Then after outcomes, then you have impact, right?
Right.
So if you break down, at project level, you realize you have kind of distilled to the level of understanding that this is actually progress. Even
Mm.
if what we want is that we want to reduce the number of out of school children in Nigeria, but we still have to start from planning. When we achieve that planning, then we are able to secure funding. and then we organize some awareness, and then it goes on and on. You see those as progress because they are going to stack up to the ultimate impact that you want to see, maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line.
Right.
And so also in life, if you approach life like that, okay, so I have a 1-year-old and I'm expecting the child to be a pro tennis player, but the child has to know XYZ, fundamentals of basic literacy and numeracy, and then calculation, logic, mental math, all of those stuff. You
Right.
know that you are never going to see the immediate result. But this generation, they want a microwave answer. It's not exactly like that. So I think the first thing is to understand that not all progress is visible immediately. Some things are happening beneath the surface. That's very important. So I don't really measure outcomes. I look at progress. That's usually my focus. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Shala. Let's talk a bit about some balance here, mental health, and how it plays in all of this. I mean, I remember when you were speaking earlier, you spoke about the misconception of thinking that disciplined people are mostly sad people, right? If I remember that correctly.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's often this tension between ambition and well-being because I mean you have to be up and doing to pretty much stand out into this world, to be honest. I don't think it's a world for laggers, right? You need to be up and doing. I think that's something everyone would agree to. Yeah. So how can individuals build systems that allow for consistency without compromising their mental and emotional health? Over.
So I think there is this rave around work-life balance. There's this big market now out there for
Yes.
well-being and all of those. For me, I think if you understand the basics, right? Um, as long as you have the systems in place, you also apply the system that you use on your projects into your life. So
Mm,
at the beginning of the year, do I run all my medical tests? Do I know where I operate on? Do I, all of those things, you get them out of the way. So, and then the recommendations for you to address those, you have them, set out. So, every morning, I need to check my blood pressure. I need to, take warm water with lemon, and so those the basic. Like it becomes an automatic. You just like standing up, waking up, and getting up from the bed. So all of those routines. So creating a routine and making sure that as you are trying to plan for the day, you're also your body is being taken care because that's very critical.
right,
Even for the mental work that you are going to do, the body is vital in making sure that happens. So I think the key is designing a system that respects your humanity, no matter how brilliant or high achieving or meaningful even that your work is, you still have your humanity to deal with.
right,
And taking care of that body, your mental health, your body, your soul, your spirit is it has to be prioritized because it's not everything that deserves equal energy, right? Every day consistently. So there are some times that is your work, there are some times that is even the emotional in terms of the social interactions of family or friends, making sure that you have time to attend the social functions, of co-workers, of neighbors, of family is quite important to be able to balance that. It's never going to be 50-50 all the time. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 90 over the other side. But having that balancing act in terms of creating designing a structure that you apply to the successful part of yourself into the other one is quite important. And also for me, how I try to balance is, like I said, I get my belief system, my core functioning. I would say my operating system from my religious
yeah,
leaning. So
yeah,
if I have that fed, so it gives me, it energizes me to know I'm working in a purposeful way. And then there's an internal, because if there's internal disconnection, from what you're doing externally and internally, then then you usually would go off at that level. So like for instance, what I tell people is that the way I know that I'm off track is when things that I should have more patience for that I don't easily. So I need to go back to the drawing board, recenter myself, and then I'll be able to, give a proper output that I need to. So that balancing act, it may not be balanced, which is
Yes.
okay because it's
Yeah.
not 50-50.
Absolutely.
So rest is important. Take time off for retreat, personal retreats, to go to the spa, however way. Some people go for boxing. That's how they distress. Some is
Mm-hmm.
tennis, some is swimming,
Mm-hmm.
and then find time for stillness because they're quite, a lot of distracted. Even if you don't have a TV, there's everywhere on the billboards, on your phone, everywhere, a lot of distraction. So stillness, and reflection and rest they are no longer luxuries. They are inputs,
Absolutely.
that actually help you to sustain performance. So the goal is not to push endlessly, it is to build a life that I can carry on consistently without collapsing. So yeah,
Thank
ultimately.
you. Thank you very much, Sola. I mean, we could go on this conversation, but for the want of time, let's try to wrap this up. And as a way of wrapping
Nice.
this up, I came across a tweet about a week ago. And you know how Twitter algorithm works. You consume something and the algorithm just keeps throwing it at you.
Showing you,
Yeah.
yes, I get it.
So
Yeah.
I consumed that content. I mean, there's this account that just that brings up very disruptive conversations. So around work and the way the corporate world is constructed. So, for instance, why should we work for 5 days? Why should we even work for 8 hours? Why should I work for 8 hours and then have just 4 hours to myself? And part of those 4 hours is commute back to the home. And you get home, for those who have kids, you have to find a way to run around. And before you know it, it's back to work, And I go through the comment section and I see people who are frustrated, venting. You are right. This is not supposed to be. We literally just live our life for the corporate space. People simply just so it feels like a safe space, for them to just sort of vent. And I've been seeing a number of tweets from that account.
Right.
Um, it means that there are people who are sort of they're sort of just passing the time at work because they are most probably not motivated
Mm.
or struggling to stay consistent or stay productive, even though they are not inspired. I think that's the word I've been looking for, even though they are not inspired to go to work, So what would you say to anyone who's listening now and is part of this category? What would you say to that person? Over.
Right. So sometimes okay, so I could interpret it as people that are stuck because of economic situation, they need to work, but they are not working in the place where they find meaningful. It's not tied to purpose. So there's a bit of frustration there. And then there's the reality that we have in the world that we live now, especially post-COVID, when we had not tested working from home, right? We didn't know that that was an option. But right after that, and when people were being forced, directly or indirectly, to begin to return to work, a physical space, work, then people then began to revolt. So I am of the opinion, I'm in the middle, which usually sometimes I'm mostly there. I quite understand those that actually love the work, but also want the freedom that is tied to the work, so that then whether I'm on the podcast, but I can hold my child, I'm feeding my child, I can also do some other things, and I still deliver because the ultimate is delivering a certain result or outcomes that is expected, right? But it also erodes the social interaction that also breeds a more robust outcome or results that one wants to see. So either way, I really can't um, I really can't side whichever side. That's if I go your question. But for those that feel overwhelmed or those that are feeling stuck,
Yeah.
I feel that I what I would usually say to them is to start smaller than you think you should. Just
Mm,
take one step at a time, one step at a time. Um, People like to just do things, just, oh, this is like an elephant, let me get it done and done with. But you become very overwhelmed
mm,
in such a situation, and you just need to take things bit by bit. And then for people also that are in a situation where they feel they are stuck because where they are at, they need to earn some they need to do a certain work before they actually get into the space where they really need to be. I would say to them to stay focused, since you know where you are heading to, but you need to pass through, and there's no experience that is wasted in life. That's what I believe, right? So I feel people should seek into themselves what their core is to anchor life beyond just going into sleepwalking through life.
right.
If you get what I mean, yes.
Thank you so much, Sola. I mean, sadly we have to draw the curtain here again. I hope we get a chance to maybe talk about this some more on another episode. I'll be super happy to get that to do that with you. Thank you so much for bringing so much depth and honesty
Thank
into
you, Sergio.
this conversation. I think I have many take homes to start. It was very profound when you mentioned that sustainable discipline is not about it's about rather it's about design rather than just a force or an impulse.
Yes.
You know, that struck me deeply because I mean most of the time we resolve or result to that impulse rather than
Mm-hmm.
building system. So what becomes clear here is that consistency is not sort of an emotional state.
Mm.
It's more of a deliberate practice. Uh,
Yeah.
and from what we've shared with us, it is shaped by staying focused, setting up or strengthening systems around you. You have to know your purpose, the why behind what you're doing, and you have to stay anchored to that purpose. If you found this episode very valuable, because I did, I would encourage you to share with someone who may be waiting for some motivation before taking that action. But until next time, remember that consistency is not about how you feel, it's about what you choose to do repeatedly, regardless of how you feel. Thank you, and stay connected to the Rhizome Podcast.